Our podcast today is brought to you in part by Real Marketing, the only marketing firm recommended exclusively by the Institute. Real Marketing utilizes over 25 years of expertise, and their products are built and customized for you to dominate any neighborhood anywhere. Go to realmarketing4u.com. That's real marketing, the number 4, u.com. Also, look for past A State of Mind episodes with CEO David Collins as our guest. Welcome to A State of Mind, a podcast series all about motivating, inspiring, and educating you in the art of selling luxury real estate. The podcast is brought to you by the Institute for Luxury Home Marketing. I'm Tami Sims, lead trainer for the Institute and a full-time real estate professional in St. Petersburg, Florida for more than 20 years now. In this episode, we're going to talk about strategies for hard-to-sell luxury listings. I'm here again today with my co-host, Jack Miller, who's with Parks Real Estate in the greater Nashville market in Middle Tennessee. Jack has specialized in luxury homes and relocation services for almost 25 years. And today, we want to talk about some strategies for luxury homes that are hard to sell. We know that typically as the price point goes up, homes become more unique and a little more challenging to sell, taking a little longer. But sometimes there's something else that poses a challenge that we have to overcome to get them sold. Now, in the Institute's training, we talk about the principle of sacrifice as a strategy to address perceived negatives that you can't change, like a small yard, power lines, and so on. And so, Jack, that makes me want to ask you about something that you mentioned about homes with really steep driveways. So in your area, what's the pushback there and what's the flip side?
Yeah, for Middle Tennessee, we have a lot of rolling hills, but we also have a lot of open, kind of fairly level areas throughout the greater Nashville area. So unlike, for example, East Tennessee, which is pretty mountainous, or unlike other parts of our country, for example, in California, you've got lots of luxury homes sitting on cliffs and hillsides, that sort of thing. Here, it's not that common, and oftentimes it's perceived as a negative because if the driveway is fairly steep, it kind of runs some buyers off. And so it's critical that you market the home toward the positives. And so in our case, we've seen sometimes, several times through the years, where homes have gorgeous views and the home itself is beautiful and showcases really nicely, but the treacherous driveway startles some of the buyers, particularly our Florida buyers, and folks coming from places with really, really level lots. So it can be a challenge, but we've also found some really unique approaches to it to get past those challenges.
Tell me about that, because that's what we want to hear today is how do we get around these things?
Yeah, so the first time that we encountered this particular issue, the steep driveway, was probably, during the market recession after '08, and we had a lot of inventory. We had a lot of luxury inventory, and there was one particular home that we were asked to list. We were the 4th listing agent in 2 years, and the home was beautiful. It was at the end of a cul-de-sac, and it had one of those types of driveways. So I approached the driveway and came up to the house, and I noticed that the reason it felt so uncomfortable to me, and probably to a lot of buyers, is because when you get to the top of the driveway and you approach the garage door, which is down for a showing, you don't have a lot of turnaround. The other thing I noticed looking at the listing itself was all the photos were your traditional listing photos. So lots of photos of, the foyer and the owner's suite and the kitchen. All these things were beautiful. And it talked about the spectacular view, but there were no aerial photos and there were no great photos showcasing that wonderful view once you get to the top of the mountain. And that's the compelling reason to buy this property. So what we did in this case was I told the sellers, I said, we're going to approach this a little bit differently. I said, we're going to start leaving the garage door open, and I'm there for the showings, but I tell buyer brokers, when you approach the garage, I asked them, I said, park just like the homeowner does. Go ahead and park in the garage. I want them to experience what that's like, and then just walk around to the front door. And by doing so, when they backed out of the garage after the showing, there was a lot of room for that turnaround, and it made the descent off of that driveway a lot less threatening when you didn't have to do a 3-point turn to get out of the parking pad. So that was the first thing. The second thing we did was we took some wonderful photos of the view in the fall of the year. So you get to see what it is you're buying. You're buying, that's what you're paying for. It's that spectacular view.
Absolutely. And that reminds me, we've talked about this before in other episodes, but using some photography that really showcases something that's not necessarily at the time that it's listed, but is something that they're going to be able to enjoy as a result of that. So I really like that strategy, and that's really tactile, if you will, right? Leaving the garage door open. So that's not like marketing around it. It's really thinking about how it feels when
That's
people are
right.
looking at the house.
And when it's your home. And we actually asked the homeowners, really funny, because we try to always think about who our target audience is, who we're marketing this property to. And so when I first saw the house, my first thought was, this probably isn't the right home for your typical, mom, dad, two or three kids, because the driveway is pretty steep. You can't really ride a bicycle down the driveway. You can't play basketball in this driveway. Although we don't talk about those things, we don't talk about people in our marketing and listings, we still need to think about who is the most logical or most likely buyer. So I made the comment to the seller that our target audience is probably a buyer without kids. And they said, no, we raised our family here. And it was great. I said, well, tell me about that. And they said, well, it's really interesting. She said, we're at the end of a cul-de-sac. It's very wooded down here. There's only two driveways at the end of the cul-de-sac. And so all the kids down the street would come to the cul-de-sac to play basketball. And when the kids were little, we set up a basketball goal at the bottom of the cul-de-sac, and everybody rode their bikes and left their bikes at the bottom of the cul-de-sac. And none of the kids brought their bikes up to the houses at the end of the day. And I thought that's really interesting. So what we did in that particular case, I told the homeowner, if you would, please write me a letter talking about what it's like to raise a family living here. And so they did. They wrote a handwritten letter. So I think that makes a statement too, seeing in the homeowner's own script, for those people who actually write in cursive any longer. But these weren't millennials. But anyway, so they wrote that letter, and we left that out on the table along with some seasonal photos of the view. So we went at it from several different angles to show what it's like to live in the property, and also taking advantage of that hillside view, and also that quiet cul-de-sac for playing for kids. So and the interesting thing was, we were the fourth agent. We didn't reduce the price. Had been on the market 2 years. It sold in 30 days.
It's the power of being creative, changing the messaging, figuring out how to work around something that otherwise you would just like throw your hands up. Finding the value that comes as a result of somebody overcoming that perceived negative.
That makes me think, Tami, also about your market when it comes to condos. We have condos here, but you've got a lot more high-rise condos, I think, in your market on the beach areas. But it also presents some challenges because there's so much growth and so much urban development. Share with me, if you would, with some things we talked about previously about what the challenges are when you're trying to sell a luxury condo when there's so much development going on around it.
Right. So most of that development that I am surrounded by is in our downtown, the urban core, as opposed to the beaches, because they kind of filled up all along the water already. So everybody's really attracted to a vibrant downtown urban space, especially in St. Petersburg. We have beautiful protected waterfront. So it's all about the view, and everybody is wants to get as close as they can to it, but they're still having to move away. So we have a lot of new buildings going up, and people get really frightened about having to live next door to construction and then what's going to happen to the view. So over the years, we've gathered a lot of photographic evidence of what a view was in a building before an adjacent building was done, and then what it was after. And people say, oh, well, that's really not bad. It just changes the view. It doesn't take it away. But still, there's pushback on being next to an active construction site. So we took a listing that had been unsuccessfully marketed by a previous agent, just kind of like you were saying. And we did need to lower the price in that case. And that's a reminder to me that there's no marketing strategy that can overcome incorrect pricing. But in this case, we lowered the price to be reflective of the fact that somebody was going to have to suffer through probably 2 years of construction right next door, right out their window. And so then we changed the marketing to focus on the fact that if they were interested in getting a telescope or a pair of binoculars and enjoying watching the development of the building next door and whatever was going on the job site, that they were going to be able to take advantage of a price that they would never be able to get into that building again. So
That's
there
right.
it was
Adopters, yeah.
yeah, it was a value proposition there, and it worked, and we got it sold, and the building adjacent got completed, and life went on, right? It was not an awful thing. It's just on to the next one. But we see that a lot now that we're starting to get back to really active construction zone in a really dense space. Now, that's a couple of different examples that you and I have just shared about how very different things are in different parts of the country and the continent, and certainly globally. You've got some very different things in terms of building materials that people are cautious about, right? You were telling me about some of the exterior finishes that that may be challenging.
Yeah, and so there were two topics we talked about. One of those I think you're alluding to is stucco. So stucco, of
Hmm.
course, comes in a variety of types. You've got synthetic stucco, EFIS. Some folks refer to it as. That's an acronym. Then there's hard coat stucco, and both products are used in on the West Coast, in Nevada, Florida, Texas, very commonly. But they're also used here in our market. And unlike some of those other markets, where the seasons tend to be warm year round, our market has lots of fluctuations, and we have a lot of rain and moisture that some of those other markets don't have. And so, as a result of that, we've had some issues, particularly with synthetic stucco. Not so much because of the product itself; it's not inherently a bad product. I think it's actually a terrific product. The problem we've had in our market is that when builders and developers saw this wonderful product that was somewhat affordable, they started using it in a lot of luxury homes in particular here in the late 80s and early 90s without adhering to the manufacturer's specifications. So they were using it all over the Middle Tennessee area, but they weren't installing it according to the manufacturer's specs. And so two of the big deals were for us is making sure you have a cutaway at the bottom on synthetic stucco so it doesn't absorb moisture from the soil, like from your landscaping, and also special caulking that's required around windows and doors and that sort of thing. But what happens, how that translates into challenges for us, is that a lot of agents don't really understand stucco, and they don't even understand there's two different kinds. And so when they see the word stucco in a description of a home or a home appears to be stucco, a lot of agents will just simply run from it.
Mm.
And they'll discourage their buyers from pursuing a stucco home, or buyers themselves have heard things and some rumors and some negative things about stucco, again, not understanding the distinction between the two types, and also even understanding enough to know that synthetic stucco can be a really good product if it's installed properly. The insulating value is better than brick, actually. But anyway, so we took it upon ourselves many years ago that when the first time we listed a stucco home, we dove into it and did as much research as possible to really understand the product, to really understand those distinctions. And so what we did to overcome that was to bring in specific stucco inspectors before listing the property to do the stucco inspection and to promote that it's already been inspected and it offers a moisture warranty, which the seller can purchase. And so you get rid of all those objections on the front end, so that when agents or buyers see that online, they see, oh, it's a stucco home. But wait a minute. Oh, it's already been pre-inspected. It's got a great inspection. Terrific. And it's got a moisture warranty. So good, we're good to go. So it kind of overcomes that objection and brings them to the table. And then the next part of that is I always took it upon myself to make sure that buyers and agents, once we got them in the home, if they love the home, I didn't want them to leave with any doubts. We talked more about that stucco product, how it's applied, and that sort of thing. So that's how we've had to deal with it, because I think in places like where you are and some of the other markets I mentioned, I think the agents are probably better educated, and certainly builders are probably better educated as a whole because it's so universally used.
Yeah. But what I took away from your comments there, number one, the importance of addressing things with our colleagues, right? It's not necessarily that the buyers are the only ones that may have a perceived negative, but our colleagues, if they're not really well educated. But it also just it proves the point too that you cannot shy away from the negatives, right? They're there, and so you have to figure out the best way to deal with it. There's so many examples of things that would just make an ordinary listing agent just get frustrated and lament the fact that they're not getting showings or the showing feedback is all the same. Instead of being creative about thinking, as you said earlier, who's the ideal target? Who is this going to be okay for? Right? We talk about a condo with no view in the training as an example. And you've got to rule out anybody who's looking for a view, and you've got to be able to focus on folks that the view is not that important. Somebody who works a graveyard shift, somebody who's visually impaired, somebody who's got a small dog and wants to be able to go down the stairs instead of the elevator. There's a whole list of things if you allow yourself to be creative and brainstorm how you get a property sold, as opposed to just focusing on how hard it's going to be to get it sold.
Yeah, we also rely on our colleagues to help us figure out what that is. I made the comment a minute ago about having to educate colleagues. Sometimes our colleagues have to educate us. I had a home several years ago that the seller had it was an older home that had done lots of updates through the years. So it was a really updated property, but we kept getting feedback from buyers via their agents saying, they love the home, they love the neighborhood, but just felt like it just seemed like it needed updating. And I was baffled by that comment. And so I brought in a group of brokers, say, hey, come look at this house. I keep hearing about the updating. Tell me what you think this is lacking. And so after bringing a number of colleagues from our company through the door and letting them look at the property, what I came to realize was, I'd seen the home so many times, I have become desensitized to this, and so had the homeowner. And it wasn't that the home itself needed to be updated as far as the kitchens or baths and the typical things that you think about. It was the presentation of the home from the street.
Ah.
So we were losing when we were tracking the sales. The buyers that seemed to be most interested when they bought something else, they were buying new construction rather than our listing. And oftentimes, new construction would be on inferior lots, smaller square footages. There were lots of negatives, but they were choosing that over ours. And what we realized was this. It was very interesting, Tami. The home is a beautiful estate home, very traditional architecture. But through the years, the homeowners, various homeowners, had done things to tweak the exterior. So it was partially brick, partially stucco, partially wood plank, and they changed paint colors and different things. And so when you looked at it, the exterior presentation felt tired. It felt stamped and dated. It wasn't unattractive. It wasn't ugly. It wasn't hard to look at house. It just felt time stamped or felt dated. And so I had several agents say, that's what you need to do is work on the exterior. So we looked at it and I said, you know what, you're right. Because when you look at all the new construction in our market during this time period, it was when the shift was first happening. It was that Chip and Joanna Gaines shift where they started became white, and that became the rage. And here we had this house with all these different colors and materials. And I said, you know what, let's bring a monochromatic presentation of the home where we have everything the same tone, whether it's white or light gray or something of that nature. We brought a designer in. That's exactly what we did. We had a painter do an entire paint job of the home. This home had been on the market for a year, Tami, with us. We had it for a year, could not sell it. We, again, didn't change the price, but while the painting was being done, we had pulled it off the market. Before the painters were finished, we got an off-market offer on the property based on how good it was looking from the street.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. And the real interesting thing was the buyer that ended up buying the property was the buyer who originally built that property 25 years earlier. And one of the neighbors said, you should come see your old house. It looks amazing. They came by to see it as it was being painted, and they fell in love with it all over again. And so, but yeah, our colleagues really helped educate us what that meant when people said it looked tired and outdated. And I had become desensitized to it. It's really interesting.
Yeah, that's so easy to fall into that, and a really great strategy to really ask your colleagues to be really specific right? Because so often we're trying not to be, mean or,
Yeah.
offend the sellers, but sometimes we just have to know. Um, I had an exterior issue once that also was impactful on a property, and this one it was a townhouse that was carved out of some conservation land. And this one was at the very end, really nice and private, but it was right up against really dense tropical Florida conservation, right? And like the kind that you wonder, is there an alligator coming out of there or snakes or whatever? And as we were getting the property ready for the market, all the vendors that were coming there, right? The contractors and the painters and all of those sorts of things. To enter the property, if you weren't going in through the garage, you had to go onto a boardwalk that ran along the side of the townhouse about halfway down before you came to the entry. And that boardwalk was right up against the conservation. And all of these, traditional macho, tradespeople were all telling me that they were terrified to walk down that boardwalk. They were like, that is so creepy. And I thought, oh, we're going to have trouble with this. And so we led with the marketing story. If you don't mind having Mother Nature as your immediate next door neighbor, you will love the privacy and lush tropical surrounding of this end townhome, right? But we had to address that right up front,
Right.
um, and it worked, and so it wasn't an issue. But boy, that was a surprising one. What
And
other
so
kinds
funny,
of
funny to hear you say that though, because in our market, that same scenario with the end unit next to a conservation area or wooded area would be a huge positive. That would be a premium unit because nothing gets you here.
Yeah, well, I mean that was our thought as well, that that would be something very appealing. But yeah, our conservation and your conservation are probably just a little bit different, right?
Although the Bears are making their migration patterns back to Middle Tennessee, that could change that whole.
Oh, it sure could. It sure could. Yeah, no bears around my area. Um, so some of the other things that we talked about as challenges is luxury homes that do not have any bedrooms on the main floor. So tell me about that from your experience, and what kinds of things we can do to work around that.
It's a tough one. It really is because, and I know this again is kind of market specific. Even within our own market, there are areas around the Nashville market where an upstairs owner suite is not necessarily perceived as a negative. For example, if you look in our historic communities, those neighborhoods that have historic overlays, most of those homes start out pretty small and have been added on to through the years. Or very commonly, the add-on might be renovating existing space, like going up into the attic. And so very often you get that really luxurious owner suite. And you don't have a very large urban footprint.
Hmm.
They'll take the attic space and convert it into a spectacular owner suite, but you go upstairs to get to it. And these are homes that don't have spaces for elevators either. But that's become such a common formula that it's not uncommon to see an upstairs owner suite in areas like this. And it's not a perceived negative. It's just finding the right buyer, but people want that historic home. They're willing to go upstairs to go to the bedroom and don't think twice about it. And I realize also in some parts of the market beyond our area, like if you go into the Northeast and other places in the country, I think of Chicago, for example, upstairs owner suites are very common. A lot
Hmm.
of folks prefer them because they like to be able to know that it's a more private area and guests don't come in and walk by your bedroom door, or if you if you're busy, you don't make the bed that day or whatever, and that nobody sees that anyway. So some folks do prefer that, but when you look at our market as a whole, excluding those historic overlays, generally speaking, the luxury home market, everybody wants a downstairs owner suite, or oftentimes they'll even request having an owner suite on each floor, like one
Hmm.
of the main floor, and perhaps an alternate upstairs owner suite. So if it's only an upstairs owner suite, it can be a big negative, a big hurdle to get over. There's different ways to approach it. I mean, if there is a way to have an elevator, if it's new construction, there's an elevator shaft already designed. That's obviously a way to solve that problem. You can promote it as, the builder will install an elevator if that's agreeable. with the right offer. That's the easiest to solve that one. A lot of folks don't like using elevators necessarily, but at least you have an option there. So that's one way about it. The other thing I think we look at for us is who is the buyer that really wants that upstairs owner suite. It's just like I kind of equate it to open floor plans. Open floor plans are very common now and very desired now. But there are buyers who don't want all that openness. They don't want to walk in the front door and see a kitchen, a family room, a fireplace, and all those things from one vantage point. So you got to find that buyer for that. That's the right fit. That's what this is all about, right?
Yeah.
Yep. So with the upstairs owner suite, I think the buyer that is most likely to appeal to on a broad scale is the buyer who has younger kids. They want to be on the same floor. And rarely do you see a home, at least in our market, that has all the bedrooms on the main floor. We don't have a lot of one-story living here. So the bedrooms are usually split. And if the owner suite and the other bedrooms are on the same floor, that's got a real strong appeal to families. And so we can't say, obviously, say this home is perfect for the growing family. We've all seen that in print and we all cringe. We're like, can't do that. So we can't say that. But what you can talk about is if it's in a great school zone, for example, you push really hard on the schools. And that's who you're tugging for the same buyer without coming out and saying, hey, this is perfect for the growing family. So you push on something different.
And from the fair housing standpoint, I want to make it absolutely clear to all of the listeners that by all means, we would sell these houses to people with families, people without, doesn't matter one way or the other, right? So it's not steering or really a fair housing issue. It's just about strategies to reach the most logical, as you said it earlier, pool of buyers.
Yeah, absolutely. There's it's really funny too. We had one of our listeners, I know you're going to talk about this in a few minutes, that talked about embracing the negative, and it's something you can't change. That's an example we just talked about. You can't change the negative, just focus on the positives. And one of the scenarios that comes to mind there, Tami, is we had a home that had like a 10-car garage.
Yeah.
Pretty dang unusual. But it did not, but a lot of the other aspects of the home were undesirable. It wasn't updated. It needed to be painted, updated. It wasn't a great lot, but it had that 10-car garage. And so at first we were approaching it from what can we do to make the other aspects of the home much more desirable, because it wasn't overpriced. We had it priced appropriately, but people kept talking about they didn't like the kitchen needed updating or whatever. So we talked about, Tami, how, if you have a house rather that has a very specific buyer need and has deficiencies, rather than trying to figure out how to change things you really can't change or can't change easily, focus on the positive. So in this case, talking about the 10-car garage, there are buyers out there that it's all about the garage and the house is just attached. And so we kind of changed our whole marketing plan and said, let's quit focusing on dodging the issues and really target who is that buyer that needs the 10-car garage. So we looked at car collectors. Where do car collectors gather? How they advertised each other for car shows? Where are those mailing lists? What are those events? How can we get in front of those people? Another thing we looked at were, again, being in the Southeast, race cars are very popular.
Yeah.
Folks with they have a very healthy income, love race cars and build cars. And so how can we reach those people? As it turns out, my business partner is one of those people. He owns race cars, he builds, and he knows that community. So we started really reaching out, trying to tap into people who need all that garage space and looking at people who want, big studios. We're in Nashville. So you have all this expandable space. We talked about places for studios. So what can you do with that space that's unique to that property that really makes it have that kind of grand appeal? So that you have to kind of shift your focus, if you will, I think.
And I love the idea. I'm thinking in the back of my head. So 10-car garage that comes with a house, right? Oh, yeah. The house is just a bonus, right? Do with it what you want. It
really is. Okay, so we sold a home about 1.5 years, 2 years ago. We've got a client that is a young couple, no kids, and he is a YouTuber. He teaches guitar on YouTube. He's a phenomenal guitar player and has made an amazing living as a young person teaching guitar. And they were wanting to buy a home, and every home they looked at All he cared about was, where's my studio space going to be, and how can I build this out? So if he had that studio space, then the rest of the home, as long as she liked it, he's happy. And so the hunt began to be all about finding studio space in the right part of town and in the right price range, and what was attached to that need to appeal to his wife. It was a very interesting home search. They ended up buying a gorgeous home in a historic district, the Belmont district near Belmont University, and it had one of these detached garages with a beautiful space over the garage. It was designed for like an in-law suite or a guest suite, teen suite, whatever, but it made the perfect studio. So it was a very different approach to looking for a home. And so we were looking at it from the buyer's standpoint in this case.
That's perfect. That's perfect. Now, talking about the address the issues that are going to be the thing, we posed this question out to some of our members in our member community. And we asked for some experiences with hard to sell properties, and we got some interesting answers. I want to share one that really speaks to that. How do we find the right audience? So Marsha Hawken from Naples, Florida, said that she has a $6 million drop dead gorgeous renovated condo in Naples. And it has a $2 million renovation, but it was originally 2 units. So the fees are double, right?
Right.
And so that's a big negative to some people. But her mindset is, okay, I have buyers from expensive homes in another area of Naples that are looking to downsize from really large single family homes, and those fees seem insignificant to them. So the point is, find your feeder markets from larger homes or folks that are from other parts of the country that are used to these crazy fees, and that becomes less of an issue. So I thought that was an interesting tactic, and it makes me think of I sold a very expensive condo to a couple from Chicago, and when I told them what the fees were going to be, they were like, "Oh, is that all? Gosh, nothing but a thing." So that's another
Yeah.
aspect of that.
Yes, it's
Um,
pretty common too, because even your luxury condos typically are not real large. And here with the Four Seasons, there were a number of buyers who came in and combined units during pre-construction phase to where they created what would have been 2 or 3 units and built those out as one. And so you had the same thing. So you buy a larger unit, you combine units, you're combining HOA fees. So yeah, it's probably a very common challenge that agents run into.
and
You got
talking about ease and assessments and that sort of thing, my world is kind of revolving around that right now, as there's been a number of legislative changes in Florida that have changed the way that associations may opt to not fund reserves fully. Now it's not their choice, and they all have to bring that up. Insurance costs have gone crazy. And so almost all of the condos are facing unusually large assessments or increases in their fees. But we've got one condo in particular that was built in 1975, and they're the first ones in town to go through the milestone structural inspection that now is a requirement as a result of the unfortunate collapse on the East
Yeah.
Coast.
Yep.
And so the assessments for these units, and there's about 250 units in this building, each unit is going to face assessments between $125,000 and $200,000 each over the span of 3 years. And so all of a sudden there was this crisis, and all of a sudden we're getting contacted by all these folks that want to sell. And so what we've been able to do is to help the sellers understand that if they really do want to sell in this market, they're going to have to make the price appealing. So essentially, instead of offering up credits or things like that, sellers that are pricing their property at just more than what that assessment is. So let's take a $200,000 off the list price. Most of them have lived there long enough that they're still going to have a gain, just maybe not as much as if they listed it last year. But being able to focus on that value. So folks that want that building with those specific amenities and those particular views are taking advantage of the opportunity to buy it for a couple of hundred less than market value and figure out how they're going to manage the couple of $100,000 assessment over the course of 3 years and ultimately end up with a fantastic product that's going to exponentially increase. So that's something that we're dealing with for sure. For sure.
And
Now
let's
you
mention something else on that topic too. This is a little off topic, but I know that when you talk to some of our listeners, we have a lot of folks in our audience who are other luxury home agents, but we have a number of listeners who are learning the market and fairly new to that aspect of the market. And I want to mention too on that topic, if you're working with a buyer and they're buying a condo, obviously, if someone's living in a condo, I think most states are probably requiring some sort of disclosure from the seller to the buyer. But there may be assessments in the works that haven't been formally launched yet that the rumor is out and the homeowners may really kind of know about, but they're not to the point where they can answer questions and say, yes, there's an assessment. And the way we know we all figure this out is when you're writing an offer, we make it subject to reviewing not just the financials, but reviewing the minutes of the
minutes.
Yeah, and going back, 6 months or maybe even a year, depending on the project, to get a sense of what types of things have been discussed. Because there may not be an assessment yet, but if you look back at the minutes from a few months ago and you see where they're talking about, we have an issue with all the windows that have to be replaced, there's going to be an assessment perhaps. That's something that buyers can and their agents can kind of clue into before making the offer or during the due diligence process. And so I thought I'd bring that up too, since we're on that topic.
Yeah, absolutely. And disclosure is just, wildly important. And even the example I was just telling you about, right? The exact amount of the assessment is not known. It hasn't been levied yet. So it's all just disclosing all the engineering reports, all of the board minutes, all of that conversation to say there is a huge assessment coming. We don't know what it is exactly, but it's huge and it's coming. So that's an interesting space to be in, to be marketing those listings there. Now, let's shift from condos to log cabins.
Yeah.
You were telling me about a very interesting log cabin that you had.
Yeah, so we listed a property. It belonged to a really prolific songwriter in our market, and he had built it years ago, raised his family, and then it was still in the family. His son basically took over the home that had not been lived in for years and did a massive renovation of a very small log cabin. But the overall price of the property was pretty high for the market because it did qualify as a luxury home because of its price point. But the home was small, but it was on about 15 acres. And so trying to find a buyer who, at that particular price point, who is willing to buy that small of a home. And the other key part here is it's in a wooded rural area. There is no sewer. It's on septic.
Oh,
So you can't even do a major expansion of the home, even though the land accommodated, the septic did not. So pretty much what you were buying is what you were going to be living in. You couldn't do a big renovation or addition to it, or not easily anyway, or not anytime soon. So anyway, that particular property was on 15 acres. Most of our luxury buyers in our market who are looking for land, if they're at a certain price point, they're not looking for 15 acres. They're wanting 100 acres, 200 acres. They're really wanting a large piece of property for that estate. And so this is a really unique kind of property because it didn't have a lot of land and it didn't have a lot of house, but it had a lot of price. But it was really nicely done. But anyway, here's the unique spin that we found on it. So in Tennessee, we have something called the Army Corps of Engineers, who is responsible for all the waterfront properties. And they own the land that borders the water. So in this particular case, this 15 acres was bordered on one side by an extremely large parcel of Army Corps of Engineer property that borders the water. So this property, in essence, had direct access to the water through that core property. And on the other side was a huge state park, hundreds and hundreds of acres. And in neither of these two large tracts, and our little tract sat right in the middle of them, neither of these two tracts could ever be developed, built on, and you can't hunt on either of those two properties. Now, where it became very interesting for this log cabin is if somebody is a nature lover, you may only be on 15 acres, but it feels like you're on 500 acres because there can never be a house around you. So that's the buyer we were looking for. And there are also buyers who are big hunters. They don't hunt 15 acres. They hunt several hundred acres typically. But here on your 15 acres, all the wildlife that lives in the hundreds of acres comes right off the property. So
Interesting.
yeah. So I know folks out there may not be hunters, and that's okay. But for those who are, this is a dream property because you had the wildlife, of hundreds of acres coming right in your backyard. And the prior owner had mentioned that to us that, his dad liked to hunt and he hunted right in the yard. And so, it was a very interesting spin. And that's who bought it. Someone who wanted to be right in the middle of wildlife. They wanted that privacy and they wanted that type of environment. And that's who we sold it to.
And it's just another great example of the fact that you got to find a story, find the thing, right, that makes it different, and then find the audience who's going to appreciate that. And it could go in a variety of different directions. But now
we actually took an aerial of that property, showing, it showed that the property itself, the subject property wasn't very large, but we showed the overall map where all the property was and said, you are here. And then made a comment saying you don't see any houses in any direction that you look, to show how isolated it was. It was a real selling point, actually.
I absolutely. I have a picture of it in my mind that just is wonderful. I see Bambi's just leaping through the backyard, going safely to the other side. Right.
Let's
well.
hope.
There are so many examples, and in what we do, we encounter situations all the time. We hear from our colleagues. I wish that we could explore all of them, but our time has come to an end for today. So I want to thank you, Jack, as always, for an engaging conversation, and to all of you who are listening and watching. Thank you so much for joining us for this episode of A State of Mind, the art of selling luxury real estate. If you're interested in learning more about the Institute, you can find that at luxuryhomemarketing.com. If you like what you just heard, please share it with a friend, and don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review this podcast. And if you've got a hot topic that you'd like us to discuss in a future podcast, feel free to let us know. Send an email to info@luxuryhomemarketing.com. Thanks so much for listening.